There is a secret that lies beneath the rubble of history. A question we have been forbidden to ask. Why was Africa, the cradle of everything, declared a land without a soul, without gods, and without history? The truth is that humanity's greatest conspiracy wasn't about gold, but about erasure. About the brutal attempt to silence the sacred names. Shango, Imanya, Ma. Their gods were so powerful that it took a global force to try and contain them. Today, this conspiracy theory falls apart. You will discover the heritage of the Atlantic, the Ifa prophecy, and the wisdom of forgotten civilizations that actually shaped the world's religions. Prepare yourself. This revelation not only changes the past, but ignites the ancestral power that sleeps within you. To ensure this flame never goes out, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on which part of the world you're ready to receive this ancient truth from. In the vastness of Africa, where the savanna kisses the horizon and time moves in circles, lies humanity's greatest secret: silence. In ancient temples, erected by the peoples of Aksum, Zimbabwe, and Mali, today we only hear the whisper of the wind among the stones. It is as if history itself had sworn an oath not to utter the sacred names, those that once echoed with the force of miracles. But make no mistake, this silence is not one of emptiness, it is one of mourning. For centuries, the priests guarded knowledge so vast it would make the world tremble, concerning creation, the stars, and the destiny of lineages. When the shadow of invasion spread, they did not flee. They transformed themselves into guardians of a mystery, hiding the scrolls and artifacts in the labyrinths of memory and at the bottom of rivers. This journey of concealment, driven by pure spiritual resistance, carried ancestral knowledge to unimaginable places. Dance, music, and secret rituals passed down orally. The temple ceased to be a stone structure and became the initiate's own body, a living sanctuary where the gods could rest, far from the fury of men who did not understand the power of divine plurality. And what remains for us is a legacy of clues. Behind every Dogon mask, in every Adinkra symbol, lies a cosmic map, a complex cosmology that Western academia insists on calling superstition. It is the truth of the profound connection between humanity, earth, and heaven that awaits to be unearthed not by archaeologists, but by those with ears of the soul. Thus, what appears to be ruin is, in fact, a portal. The silence of the priests challenges us to look inward, to seek the lost echoes of our own ancestry. For the best-kept secret is not in the sand, but in the recognition that the energy of these gods has never truly left, only awaits the moment to be invoked again. In ancient Africa, fire was never just heat. It was the voice of a deity, a purifying power, unyielding justice. And there was no flame more feared and respected than that of Shango, the Orisha of thunder and fire, a king who became a god, whose crown was not of gold, but of pure flames. He was the personification of passion, strategy, and above all, the truth that comes with the roar of thunder. When the iron ships docked and the darkness of the Inquisition settled in, Shango was the first target of the conspiracy. His image, the black warrior with the double-edged axe, represented everything the new order feared: native authority, indomitable passion, and the power to overthrow tyrants. Therefore, the order was clear: destroy the symbols, burn the statuettes, extinguish the sacred fire. Shango's crown, however, could not be burned. While the metal of his representations melted under the hatred of the colonizers, the essence of the Orisha migrated. He hid in syncretism, wearing the cloak of Saint Jerome or Saint Barbara, but his essence remained alight in the hearts of the enslaved and the rebels. This journey of camouflage taught his followers a profound lesson about spiritual resilience. The symbol can be broken, but the strength cannot. Shango's righteous anger manifested itself not in open wars, but in silent revolts, in the struggle for liberation, in the stifled cry that precedes the storm. His invisible axe continued to work, cutting the bonds of deception. And today, as the thunder rumbles, it is he who reminds us of justice that is slow in coming, but never fails. The crown of fire is a beacon for the diaspora, a reminder that Shango's power still resides in those who rise up against oppression. He is proof that African spirituality has always been, and always will be, the voice of non-negotiable dignity. Consider the great rivers of Africa, the Nile, the Congo, the Niger. They are not merely bodies of water, they are the veins of the continent, the sacred corridors where life and death meet. For ancestral peoples, these rivers carried the stories of lineages, rites of passage, and, tragically, the blood of the great oblivion. They witnessed the arrival of disorder and became the silent guardians of drowned secrets. During the dark period, when human flesh became a commodity, these sacred rivers transformed into corridors of pain. What was once the route of the pharaohs and gold merchants became the path to slavery, stained with suffering. It is in this moment of rupture that the spiritual conflict becomes palpable. The purity of the water, linked to goddesses like Imania and Oxum, was profaned by chaos. But water is life, and the memory of water is infinite. This symbolic journey of pain did not destroy the river deities. It made them stronger and more resilient. The Yabas, mother goddesses, migrated along with their children, hiding their strength in the oceans and rivers of the New World. African spirituality taught that, even in captivity, the water that connects us to the womb of creation can never be imprisoned. The spiritual unfolding of this tragedy is our healing. The river of blood today reminds us that the pain of our ancestors is real, but that the power of water is greater. It has the power to purify, to carry offerings, and to whisper the names of those who have passed, ensuring that the cycle of life continues, despite everything. Therefore, when we look at the vastness of the Atlantic, we don't just see a sea. We see the path of tears and, at the same time, the house of Imania. It is the liquid testimony that the sacred lineage has not broken, only scattered, waiting for the moment to reunite its waters again in the great ocean of identity. In the heart of Mali, nestled among rocky peaks and clay villages, lives the Dogon people, guardians of a stellar knowledge that defies time and modern science. Their central mystery resides in Namo, the amphibious deity, and in their sacred masks, artifacts of iron and wood made not to conceal, but to reveal cosmic truths. The iron mask, in particular, symbolizes resistance to the erosion of time and the permanence of knowledge. The conflict here is not only historical, but astronomical. The Dogon possessed, and still possess, detailed information about Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye, long before it was discovered by Western telescopes. This raised a question that official history refuses to answer. Where did this forbidden knowledge come from? Was it an inheritance from forgotten civilizations or a direct connection to the Namo themselves? The symbolic journey of this mask is a lesson in discretion. To protect this wisdom from profane curiosity and colonial plunder, the Dogon perfected the art of concealment. They transformed their rituals into codes, ensuring that the profound meaning was only accessible to initiates, keeping the link with the stars intact. The iron of the mask is the shield that repels oblivion. Spiritual unfolding teaches us that truth, when threatened, needs to disguise itself. The iron mask is not a static object. It is a portal to the lineage of knowledge that connects Earth to the cosmos. The strength of the Dogon lies in its ability to maintain dialogue with the infinite, ignoring the linear and superficial history that the outside world tried to impose. Therefore, when we look at this iron mask, we don't see a relic. We see proof that Africa was the first to map the stars and understand the cycle of creation. It is the cosmic secret that awaits us. With each eclipse, with each new cycle of Sirius, the voice of Namo whispers that the greatest mysteries are hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to have the courage to look to the sky. Alexandria, in Egypt, was a beacon of knowledge, a confluence where African, Greek, and Eastern wisdom met. Its great library, an invaluable treasure, held scrolls that traced the lineages of the Black Pharaohs, detailed the cosmologies of Nubia, and described the true origin of the myths that the West would later claim. It was the starting point of all history, and for that reason, it needed to be silenced. The conflict, which dragged on for centuries, culminated in an act of intellectual barbarity, the destruction of the library. It was not merely the loss of books, it was a forbidden edict of erasure, a brutal attempt to sever the link between ancient Africa and global civilization. What was hidden there were texts that perhaps linked the concept of Genesis and creator deities directly to the peoples of the Nile, challenging the imposed chronology. The symbolic journey of the wise men of Alexandria, however, did not end in ashes. Many of these masters, seeing the impending catastrophe, fled. They took with them the coded knowledge, inscribing it in the symbols of the religions that were emerging or hiding it in underground crypts and in the oral traditions of distant peoples, such as the Falashes of Ethiopia. The spiritual unfolding of this escape is that knowledge, when true, cannot be burned. It becomes itinerant. The wisdom of Kemet survived in the most isolated corners of the continent and in the murmurs of the initiates, proving that Africa has always had its own version of creation and science, independent and older than its inquisitors. This destruction is not the end, but the beginning of an intellectual treasure hunt. The Edict of Alexandria reminds us that the search for truth requires the courage to question official history. The ashes of the library still hold secrets. And the greatest revelation lies in understanding that much of what is called Western has its roots in the African cradle, waiting only for us to reread its hieroglyphs. Imagine entire cities where the streets were paved with the gold of art and wisdom. Cities like Ife, cradle of the Yoruba people, and the imposing Great Zimbabwe, centers of political and spiritual sophistication that medieval Europe could not even dream of achieving. These were not just cities, they were sanctuaries of divine lineages, places where art was, in fact, a form of communication with the gods and ancestors. The brutal conflict began when greed disguised itself as a civilizing mission. The plundering of these golden cities was not only for material gold, but also for spiritual gold. To justify slavery and domination, it was necessary to prove that these peoples were primitive, and the best way to do this was to steal and hide the evidence of their greatness, statues, obelisks, and ritual jewelry. The symbolic journey of these treasures is one of forced exile. Today, many of these artifacts, laden with spiritual power, lie silently in the basements and display cases of European museums, far from the sacred context that gave them life. They have become mere objects of art, but for the African people, they are more. They are imprisoned ancestors, crying out for their return and for justice. The spiritual unfolding of this diaspora of artifacts is our reconnection. Each stolen piece carries with it the energy of a god or a prophecy, and the demand for its return is an act of healing the collective soul. It is a movement that seeks to reactivate the spiritual force of Africa, proving that the identity of a people cannot be held captive in glass cases. The sack of the golden cities, therefore, is not merely a chapter of historical theft. It is a mystery that invites us to understand that African beauty and wisdom were, paradoxically, the reasons for their persecution. And the key to the continent's restoration may lie in the return of these sacred symbols, so that the gods may finally return home. When the colonizers arrived, carrying the cross and the sword, they brought with them the most pernicious of lies, the doctrine of emptiness. They imposed the idea that Africa, despite its antiquity, was a land without history, without organized religion, and, crucially, without a soul. This belief was the ideological foundation for violence, justifying that the supposed emptiness could be filled with foreign faith and culture. The conflict was not merely territorial, but semantic. By calling the African gods demons or superstition, and by denying the complexity of the cosmologies from Kemet to Ife, they created a chasm between the people and their own sacred identity. The objective was simple: if you have no history, you have no value, and you can be dominated. This was the cruelest distortion. The symbolic journey of the wise men, in response to this doctrine, was one of invisible resistance. Many initiates chose silence, the code. They knew that true wealth lay not in what was visible, but in what was undeniable. African faith took refuge in nature, in dances, and in oral tradition, proving that the soul of the continent was too vast to fit within the boxes of foreign dogma. The spiritual unfolding of this resistance is the rediscovery of fullness. The doctrine of emptiness failed miserably, for the emptiness revealed itself to be full of life, art, and divinity. Today, the struggle for recognition is not to create a history, but to retell the history that was stolen, reaffirming that Africa is the cradle of the sacred. Thus, the great mystery lies in unmasking this doctrine. The true revelation is not that Africa had gods, but that its gods were so powerful and ancient that they needed to be intentionally erased so that other narratives could flourish. And this void is the space from which spiritual rebirth is now emerging. When persecution reached its peak, ancestral faith found an ingenious way to survive. This is what we call syncretism, a dance of spiritual masks where African gods hid under the cloaks and halos of Catholic saints. Far from being a simple fusion, it was a mystical warfare strategy, a shining shield forged in the need to protect the sacred essence. The conflict was one of life or death. If an enslaved person openly prayed to Ogun, the Orisha of iron and war, he would be punished. But if he prayed to Saint George, the warrior saint, he would go unnoticed. This necessity created hidden parallels. Imania, the Queen of the Sea, found refuge in Our Lady of the Conception. Oxasi, the hunter, donned the guise of Saint Sebastian. The name changed, but the strength, the dance, and the mystery behind the mask remained the same. The symbolic journey of syncretism leads us to understand the depth of African spiritual intelligence. They did not abandon their deities, they made them invisible to the eyes of the oppressors. This practice kept the lineage alive, allowing ancestral wisdom, acts, to cross the Atlantic and flourish in the Americas, more African than ever. The spiritual unfolding of this camouflage is proof that faith is indestructible. Syncretism is not a betrayal, but a tactic of resistance. It is a revelation that the divine essence can manifest itself in diverse forms, showing that Africa has always known that names are merely garments for the energy that moves the universe. And what remains for us, when we look at this story, is admiration for this survival. Syncretism as a shield teaches us that true spirituality is flexible and intelligent. The secret lies in deciphering the mask. When you see the saint, you need to close your eyes and listen to the drum that plays the real name of the god behind him. Many believe that with the destruction of temples and the prohibition of rituals, the power of African gods vanished. But this is an illusion planted by forgetfulness. The truth that the ancients guarded is that divinity does not reside in statues or stone constructions, but in an invisible and pulsating force, ax, or sebe in other traditions, the vital energy that permeates creation. The conflict is subtle, yet profound. While the oppressor tried to erase religion, he failed to extinguish the energy. Ax, this sacred power, could not be imprisoned on slave ships or burned at the stake. It hid itself in the most everyday manifestations, in the insistent rhythm of the drum, in the seed that sprouts in the earth, in the very capacity to love and resist. The symbolic journey of Ax is proof that African spirituality is indestructible. It became the invisible link, the chain that connected ancestral memory to present life, especially in the diaspora. Wherever there was a chant, a dance, or a community gathered to honor life, there was Ax, preserving identity even under the whip. The spiritual unfolding of this is the great revelation. The gods did not die, they became even more immanent. They merged with the people, teaching that true sacredness is not outside, but within each one, waiting to be awakened. Life itself became the ritual and resistance, the supreme act of faith. Therefore, when you hear the sound of a marimba or see the beauty of an African woman or a woman from the diaspora, you are not just observing art or people. You are witnessing the invisible link in action, the silent proof that the cosmic force of Africa refused to be extinguished and continues to flow, more vibrant than ever, in the secrets of survival. Ifa is not merely an oracle, it is a complete cosmology, the matrix of Yoruba knowledge, carried by the Odiyu, the sacred texts that detail the past, present, and future. And within Ifa, there is a central revelation, an ancestral wisdom that spoke of a time of darkness, the great forgetting, and the promise of an eventual great reconnection. It is the prophecy that gave hope in captivity. The conflict here is the struggle against despair. Ifa not only narrated the creation of the world, it foresaw the arrival of the strange gods, and the rupture that would come with slavery and colonization. But, crucially, the prophecy also guaranteed that the light would return, that the truth would not be lost forever, as long as the initiates kept the ritual and the memory intact, whatever the cost. The symbolic journey of the Babylos, Ifa priests, was extremely perilous. To keep the prophecy alive, they had to carry the Odu on their heads, memorizing thousands of sacred verses, while watching their temples being destroyed. They transformed their minds into sacred vaults, ensuring that the cycle of prophecy would not end and that the seed of reconnection would be planted in the diaspora. The spiritual unfolding of this prophecy is that it is being fulfilled before our very eyes. The global search for Ifa, the renewed interest in African cosmology, and the reclaiming of ancestral identity are signs of the great reconnection. The prophecy teaches us that the time of forgetting is ending, and the truth about the African origin of spirituality is resurfacing. Therefore, Ifa is more than a guide. It is the historical and spiritual certainty that the night does not last forever. The mystery it reveals is that the future of Africa and the diaspora is not an accident, but a prophesied destiny. And with each new person who encounters their ancestry, the prophecy of Ifa grows stronger, guiding us back to cosmic order. In the search for Africa's hidden truth, we encounter the greatest paradox. Many have been taught that the concept of a single, supreme, and creator God was imported to Africa by missionaries. But ancestral wisdom, inscribed in the depths of history, reveals a secret predating any Bible. Africa already knew the forbidden name of God, the supreme being who orchestrates the entire cosmos. The conflict, in this case, is the intentional distortion. In various African cultures, we find names like Olodumare, Yoruba, Ra, Kemet, or Nai, Masai, supreme, distant, and creator deities who delegated direct contact with humanity to lesser pantheons. The colonizers, instead of recognizing this ancestral monotheistic sophistication, preferred to deny it in order to impose their own narrative. The symbolic journey of these forbidden names was one of subtle resistance. While popular faith clung to the Orishas and Vodans, which were more accessible, high-ranking initiates kept the knowledge of the supreme being intact. They knew that the essence of African faith was monotheistic in origin and pluralistic in manifestation, a complexity that the West could not or did not want to understand. The spiritual unfolding of this revelation is the recovery of African theological depth. The discovery that the concept of a one and transcendental God is not exclusive to foreign cultures changes the hierarchy of history. This teaches us that Africa did not need to be evangelized. It was already the mother of theologies, and its faith was as sophisticated as any other. The mystery surrounding the forbidden name of God invites us to respect the antiquity and spiritual complexity of Africa. It is proof that the continent's faith is not a copy, but the source, the wellspring from which many sacred concepts have drawn. And the silent voice of Olodumare continues to echo, reminding us that it all began here. In the kingdoms of the Nile, Maya was not merely a winged goddess. She was the very foundation of the cosmos, the supreme principle of order, truth, and justice. For Kemet, governing was not about power, but about maintaining the balance of Ma'at on earth, ensuring that the universe did not descend into chaos. She was the forgotten moral code, the key to a just society that Africa taught the world. The great historical conflict is that Ma'at has been systematically replaced by the law of power and force. The fall of the Egyptian and Kushite civilizations and the rise of empires based on exploitation resulted in what the ancients called isfit, disorder, the opposite of Ma'at. This spiritual and political imbalance is what Africa and the world have suffered ever since. Ma'at's symbolic journey is the quest for the feather of truth. Her priests and pharaohs kept her alive through rituals and oaths, teaching that social justice and harmony with nature were divine acts. She hid within the ethical traditions of West and Central Africa, in proverbs and respect for elders, awaiting the moment to be restored. The spiritual unfolding is the revelation that politics and spirituality cannot be separated. The return of Ma'at is, in fact, the cure for modern ills. It teaches us that corruption, injustice, and war are symptoms of a departure from this ancestral principle. To reclaim Ma'at is to reclaim integrity. Therefore, when we look at the struggles for justice and equality in the world today, we are witnessing the silent cry for Ma'at. It is the mystery that invites us to reshape our understanding of power. The true leader is not the one who dominates, but the one who keeps the scales of truth perfectly balanced. The Bible tells us the story of Moses in Egypt, but it hides a monumental secret: the profound connection between the land of Kemet and the kingdoms to the south, especially Kush and Meroe, ruled by black pharaohs. Official history attempts to separate Egypt from sub-Saharan Africa, but archaeology and lineage force us to question: could the figure of Moses and much of early Hebrew knowledge not have flourished under the direct influence of African thrones? The conflict lies in the forbidden chronology. Meroitic and Kushite evidence points to a period of great black power on the Nile, directly influencing Egyptian culture and religion. The mystery is this: if Moses grew up in the court, he was initiated into a wisdom that was not white or foreign, but rather inherently African, linked to the vast spirituality of the Nile. The symbolic journey is the deconstruction of identity. The denial of the pharaoh's blackness is an attempt to delegitimize the African contribution to the foundations of Western faith. But this sacred lineage endures. Kemet's knowledge of immortality, resurrection, and the final judgment is strikingly similar to concepts that would later be codified in other major religions. The spiritual unfolding of this revelation is reconnection. The recovery of Kushite influence and the identity of the Black Pharaohs is not merely a historical fact. It is proof that Africa not only participated in but shaped the sacred texts that govern billions of people today. The source of monotheism and of many moral laws may lie further south than history allows us to admit. Thus, the enigma of Moses and the Black Pharaoh invites us to read the sacred texts with new eyes. The secret that emerges is that the spiritual force of Africa is so vast that it not only generated its own gods, but also influenced the journey of the great prophets. And the truth is written not in the sand, but on the forgotten obelisks of Meroe. As we cross the vast Atlantic, we encounter a mystery that defies official history: the profound and strange similarities between African serpent and fertility deities and those of Mesoamerica, such as the mythical figure of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. This forbidden connection raises an age-old question: did African and American civilizations share an oceanic wisdom that has been erased? The conflict lies in the narrative of isolation. Western science insists that Africa and the Americas had no significant contact before 1492. However, legends, symbols, and even artifact evidence from sites like Olmec and Tlaloc suggest otherwise. The mystery resides in the details. Why did the worship of amphibious and serpent deities, such as Namo, Damballa, and Quetzalcoatl, flourish on continents separated by an ocean, while maintaining almost identical rituals and symbolism? The symbolic journey of these gods teaches us about the fluidity of faith. The coastal and riverine cultures of West Africa, Dahomey, Yoruba, had masters of the sea and experienced navigators. It is possible that knowledge, art, and symbolism were transported along ancient maritime routes, transforming the Atlantic from a barrier into a spiritual bridge. The spiritual unfolding of this revelation is a glimpse into an ancient global civilization where knowledge flowed freely before the Iron Empires. The plumed serpent and the deities of thunder and the sea became the codes of a shared wisdom, proving that the roots of spirituality were interconnected and far older than we imagine. The secret of Quetzalcoatl invites us to discard the Eurocentric map of history. What has been hidden is that Africa influenced not only the Mediterranean, but also the New World. It is proof that our ancestry is oceanic, and that the power of the gods is strong enough to transcend continents and centuries. When millions of Africans were brutally torn from their land and thrown into the Americas, the enemy hoped that ancestral faith would die in captivity. But history reveals a spiritual miracle. The diaspora became the ark of salvation for African mythology. In lands like Bahia, Haiti, and Cuba, faith not only survived, it flourished, paradoxically becoming purer and more intense, far from direct colonial repression. The conflict here is a struggle for the soul. The colonizers tried to impose total oblivion, prohibiting the language, the drum, and the ritual. However, Africans and their descendants used creativity and syncretism as tools for survival. Captivity became a spiritual forge, where the bonds with the Orishas and Vodans were kept alive as the last and most important inheritance. The symbolic journey of the Atlantic heritage is proof that African spirituality is the great engineer of resilience. Faith has become central to social and political resistance, inspiring revolts and forming cohesive communities. Far from being erased, the gods have gained new names, new rhythms, and new strengths, adapting to protect their children in a hostile world. The spiritual unfolding of this journey is the revelation that Africa lives in every beat of the drum and in every trance in the sacred spaces of the New World. The rituals, the music, and the sacred languages preserved in the diaspora are the living texts that the colonizer could not burn. They are the memory that withstood the sea, an invaluable legacy. Therefore, when we look at the cultural and spiritual strength of Black America, we see the Atlantic heritage in full force. It is a mystery that teaches us that the true homeland of the soul is not a geographical place, but the unbreakable bond with ancestry. The diaspora ensured that the light of Africa would never be extinguished. The time of masks is ending. Today, all over the world, young Africans and people from the diaspora are undertaking a sacred journey, the rescue of identity, which is essentially the search for the original names of their gods. This is not just about religion. It is an act of political and spiritual sovereignty, a refusal to accept the version of history that has been imposed upon them. The conflict now is internal. It is the struggle against ancestral trauma and the legacy of erasure. Many have been taught that their gods are evil or non-existent, and that their rituals are primitive. But reclaiming identity is the courage to shed these imposed dogmas and embrace the complexity, beauty, and antiquity of one's own spirituality. The symbolic journey is one of return. Young people seek the roots of their faith in archives, oral traditions, and their countries of origin. Syncretism, which was once a shield, is now unveiled, and the names of the Orishas and Vodans are proclaimed with pride, without the disguise of saints. It is a healing movement that demands a deep dive into what was once considered forbidden. The spiritual unfolding of this quest is the reactivation of ancestral power. By calling upon a god by their original name, it is as if an ancient key is turned, reopening portals of knowledge and strength. The reclaiming of identity proves that African spirituality is not a relic, but a living and dynamic force, capable of transforming the present and healing the past. The rescue of identity, therefore, is our great modern mystery. It teaches us that the healing of a nation and a people begins with the name given to the sacred. It is proof that the conspiracy of forgetting has failed and that the light of ancestry is, finally, shining with its full, undeniable, and powerful intensity. There is a pain that does not heal with time, the pain of forced silence. Imagine the weight carried by an ancestor who was forbidden from uttering the name of his god, from singing his family song, from practicing the ritual that gave him meaning. This silence was not just a deprivation, it was a spiritual wound passed down through generations, a trauma that echoes to this day in fragmented identities. The conflict, in this case, is the very negation of voice. The oppressor understood that stealing physical freedom was not enough. It was necessary to steal the capacity to express one's own faith. Forcing the African to renounce the sacred name of his family was the ultimate act of violence, a sacrilege aimed at breaking the link between the individual, ancestry, and the cosmos. The symbolic journey of silence is the quest for deep listening. In many traditions, knowledge came to be preserved in nonverbal forms, such as art, the rhythm of the drum, and the gaze. Silence, then, became a refuge, a place where communication with the sacred could continue to occur secretly and inviolably, far from the ears and eyes of the colonizer. The spiritual unfolding of this experience is the revelation that the voice, when recovered, is more powerful than any weapon. Breaking the weight of silence today is an act of spiritual liberation, the healing of an age-old trauma. It is the moment when the diaspora and Africa reaffirm their capacity to name the world and, thus, reaffirm their place in the universe. The silence that was once imposed is the mystery that invites us to listen to the untold stories. It teaches us that, to understand the depth of African faith, it is necessary to listen not only to what has been said, but to what has been kept secret, and to what is, finally, being whispered anew. Look around. The chaos, political corruption, internal wars, and social disorder that plague many African nations and the diaspora are not mere accidents of history. Ancestral wisdom teaches us that this disorder is the echo of the abandonment of wisdom, a painful manifestation of the Isfit that took hold with the fall of Maat. It is what legends call the wrath of the ancestors. Conflict is the price paid for amnesia. By turning our backs on the ethical principles of the gods, by neglecting respect for elders, and by breaking the cycle of reciprocity with nature, society becomes unbalanced. The wrath of the ancestors is not divine vengeance, but the natural consequence of living outside the cosmic order established by Olodumare and the Orishas. The symbolic journey to appease this anger is one of returning to the source. The path to healing involves reactivating ancestral values: community over the individual, justice over profit, connection with nature over blind exploitation. It is a lesson that social balance is intrinsically linked to spiritual balance. The spiritual unfolding of this anger is the opportunity for redemption. It forces us to confront modern chaos and recognize that the key to peace lies not in foreign models, but in the rediscovery of the moral code that already existed here. Africa holds the solution to its problems, and that solution is inscribed in its own mythologies. Thus, the wrath of the ancestors is the mystery that warns us. It is the cry of the past demanding attention in the present. The true revelation is that the restoration of order will not come through decrees, but through the sacred act of honoring what has been forgotten and re-establishing harmony between man, earth, and heaven. The Sahara Desert, the heart of the savanna, and the dense forests seem vast and empty to the inattentive eye, but for those with awakened souls, the land of Africa is a living scroll. The ancients said that the deepest truth is not written in books, but in the stars and in the very vibration of the earth. It is the whisper in the savanna, the promise that the time of forgetfulness is finally ending. The conflict, which resides in perception, is the struggle to silence the noise of the modern world and hear the voice of nature. The colonizer and contemporary haste have tried to stifle this whisper, imposing an accelerated and disconnected life. But the earth, which is the manifestation of goddesses like Odujua and Mama Wata, holds the memory of all that has happened. The symbolic journey of the whisper is one of patience and listening. Those who seek reconnection need to lie under the African sky, far from the city lights, to decipher the cosmic prophecy. Each falling leaf, each moving shadow, and each shining star contains a fragment of Ifa, a piece of truth that needs to be stitched back into consciousness. The spiritual unfolding of this listening is the certainty of immortality. The whisper in the savanna reveals to us that Africa is a living being, and its gods are eternal forces that cannot be confined by a historical period. They promise the end of the night and the return of an era where justice and ancestral wisdom will flourish again. Therefore, the mystery of the whisper in the savanna invites us to silence ourselves so that the truth may be heard. It is the hope that, even after centuries of oppression, the essence of the continent remains intact, waiting only for its children to bow down again and listen to what the wind brings from time immemorial. After centuries of silence and camouflage, the darkness begins to recede. What was once an isolated search in the basements of history is now a global movement. The awakening. Imagine the emotion and shock of an archaeologist or a young person in the diaspora upon touching an ancient artifact, a forgotten text, or hearing a chant that inexplicably resonates with their soul. In that instant, the past is no longer past. It ignites in the present. The ultimate conflict is the battle against inertia and disbelief. Awakening demands the courage to accept that the world you've been told about is incomplete, and that the true history of humanity is largely set in Africa. This revelation is shocking, as it forces the individual to restructure their own identity and their relationship with faith and power. The symbolic journey of awakening is one of enlightenment. With each symbol deciphered, each divine name reclaimed, each tradition reactivated, the veil of forgetfulness is torn. The African gods who hid themselves in water, fire, and music return to the surface of consciousness, offering not only a past, but a moral and spiritual map for the future. The spiritual unfolding of this enlightenment is the consolidation of ancestral power. The awakening is proof that the age-old conspiracy has failed. Africa is not only reclaiming its history, it is rekindling its spiritual strength, showing that its wisdom is the foundation for healing the planet and redefining what it means to be human. The great final mystery is your participation in this awakening. This is not a story merely to be observed, but to be lived. The awakening invites you to seek your own connection, to feel the ancestral energy that pulsates beneath the myths. The night is over, and the forbidden truth is, finally, in the sunlight. We've closed this cycle of revelations, but the story, you see, doesn't end here. What we have learned is that Africa's spiritual legacy is not a dusty relic, but a source of strength that flows tirelessly through time. The silence that was imposed is, today, our greatest proof that truth is indestructible. The gods they tried to erase did not die. They merely became more discreet, waiting for us to have the dignity to call them by their original names. Feel the echo of this ancestry. It is your backbone, your compass. May this ancestral knowledge inspire in you a deep respect for the past and the courage to question what you have been taught. The awakening has begun, but many mysteries still lie dormant beneath the sands of time. Don't miss the next chapter of this forbidden saga. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because with each new revelation, the light of Africa grows stronger.